Every so often, the topic of vitamin D deficiency and the need for everyone to take supplements hits the news cycle. You've probably heard it recently. I have. It's summertime. It's on the news quite a bit actually right now. So the question becomes, how many supplements, whether in pill, powder, or shake formulas, have you bought because either Dr. Oz or the news or Nightline or some women's lifestyle magazine said you should? I have, probably way more than I should have. So now we've got advertising that is disguised as social media reels and shorts. We've got overnight Amazon delivery, literally a click away. I'm going to guess that impulse purchases of all kinds of products, whether they're promising health or beauty or anti-aging, all at this click of a button, they're all at an all-time high. My name is Kelli. If you don't know me, I'm an educator and a health advocate. My mission is to help people become more informed consumers of healthcare. I have found that people have all kinds of diet and lifestyle decisions and choices that they make every single day that may be negatively impacting their health. And so my goal is to help them identify what those are and then consider modifications to those choices so that they can live a longer, healthier life. You want to do it in a way that's fun and enjoyable and sustainable, however. So that's my goal. So today I'm going to further that goal a little bit by giving you the real truth about vitamin D, about sunlight, and your health. And if you want more information about this, I've got all of this information fully referenced in my blog post on my website, which is www.kellijomo.com. That's KELLIJOMO.com. So first thing I want to do is I want to get everybody up to speed on what vitamin D is, how your body's using it, and how much you really need. Something you might be surprised about. Vitamin D is actually not a vitamin. It's a hormone. It's a hormone and it's a nutrient that our bodies produce in response to sunlight and some plant foods, but mostly sunlight. It's got a whole bunch of different functions in our bodies, so it's super, super important. So the first question that you might have is, if it's a hormone, why do we call it a vitamin? Well, that's because it was discovered back in the early 1900s when they also discovered vitamins A, B, C, and E. Scientists at the time were looking for a way to treat rickets in young children. Rickets is a bone disease that is mostly attributed to not getting enough sun, all right, as well as not getting enough nutrients. And it's really just because these kids were starving. It was a time where there just was not enough food. So initially, when the scientists were studying this, they missed that vitamin D is a nutrient that our bodies are creating, not something that's absorbed through food intake, which is the case for vitamins A, B, C, and E. So they mislabeled it, called it a vitamin, it stuck. It's just one of those things. So since that time, we have found that this nutrient and hormone called vitamin D is definitely synthesized in the skin when exposed to UVB rays, which is found in sunlight. It's fat soluble, which means that it's stored in our fat, and that's super important. It's not excreted through urine the way vitamins A or C would be. So you have to be a little careful, right? So too much vitamin B, which usually happens with supplementation, can be stored in your body, and too much of a good thing is still too much. And it can cause health issues that are very difficult to reverse. So we don't want to get too much vitamin D at all, but we do need enough. And the reason that we need enough is this is a super important hormone in our body that regulates the expression of 1,000 or so of our genes, super important, helps our bodies absorb minerals like calcium and magnesium, phosphorus. It helps control inflammation. It's really big on helping to control inflammation. It also promotes something called cell autophagy, which is kind of interesting. It's when old and damaged cells are killed off. We want that to happen because those old and damaged cells can become cancer cells later. So if we don't have adequate amounts of vitamin D being created in our body, then these things aren't going to happen. So the question becomes, how much is enough? Well, for many, many years, the serum levels that doctors commonly use to indicate that a person was healthy was something called 20 ng ml, so that's 20 nanograms per milliliter. Here's where the marketing efforts kicked in, right? So there were some scientists who, of course, follow the money. They were funded by the pharmaceutical and tanning bed industries for their research, or at least mostly financed by them. They determined that more was better, so they raised that quote-unquote healthy levels to 30 nanograms a milliliter. Went from 20 to 30. Well, that one thing almost immediately meant that 80% of the US population was vitamin D deficient. We probably still are. How convenient is that for the supplement industries or the tanning bed industries, right? They had just the products to give you that would help you become sufficient in that vitamin. The most notable researcher in this project was Dr. Hollick, and you'll hear about him in a minute again, but he and his team were paid very, very well for the research. So what resulted in that was $936 million in sales of vitamin D in a 10-year period between 2007 and 2017. In 2016 alone, 10 million tests were paid for by Medicare to the tune of $365 million. So what's the science really say about vitamin D? Well, first of all of them do agree that vitamin D is produced in the skin when exposed to UVB rays. I already said that. They've also all agreed that sunlight is the most efficient way to get vitamin D. It's not through supplementation. The most efficient way is through sunlight. I also want to point out that tanning beds that were financing that originally, we've now learned that tanning beds use UVA rays and not UVB, so they're really not very effective in this at all. They're just not. It's just, you're not creating vitamin D if you're sitting in a tanning bed. You have to get out in the sun. But to get the amount of vitamin D that we need to do all these things, again, I'm going to mention it again, the genetic expression, right? Over 1,000 genes in our body need vitamin D to work properly. Reduce inflammation, absorbing important minerals, killing off those old and harmful cells to prevent things like cancer. All it takes to do all of those things for most Americans is going to be 10 to 20 minutes in the sun a couple times a week during the summer months. And the reason during the summer months is because at that point in time, the sun is stronger. If you do this, most people, including those living in the northern states, are going to produce enough vitamin D for their bodies to be able to function the way that they should function, not only during the summer, but also through the winter. It's kind of interesting. Right now, there are no organizations in the U.S. that recommend population screening, which means everybody gets screened, similar to a mammogram or a colonoscopy or something like that. Nobody's recommending that. The Endocrine Society and the American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists are recommending for screening, but only for people at risk. To be honest, I'm going to say this, okay? So Dr. Hollick was a prominent member of both of those associations, and my guess is that they were probably swayed into that decision because of him and the fact that it was his research. But it makes me wonder something, and hopefully you've already thought about this. If Medicare has spent $365 million for tests in 1 year alone, for screening that's not even recommended for the general population, were all of those people at risk? Were all of those people showing signs of deficiency? My guess is not. My guess is that it was marketing efforts from companies that show up on the news, show up in commercials, incentivizing the prescriptions for D3. So when the doctor is on the news talking about this, or quite frankly any topic, I want you to remember that they have time to fill, okay? It's a slot in a news segment. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're filling it with accurate information, quite frankly. If your doctor has recommended vitamin D, if your doctor is one of the guys that's saying, hey, I need you to take this, ask them why. Is it because I'm exhibiting symptoms of deficiency? Am I in one of the at-risk groups? If I'm not, then is it necessary? Why is it? What they might tell you is that they believe now that some diseases are caused by deficiency, and so they're recommending it as a preventative measure. But I want to explore that more for a second. That's really come up in the last 2 or 3 years. Here we are in 2023, the last few years, people have been hearing that diseases like diabetes or metabolic disease or heart disease, high blood pressure, things like that, the propensity to catch a virus or have that virus really take over pretty strongly is improved if you're taking vitamin D supplements. But this is actually a situation where causation and correlation are confused. The diseases are not caused by the vitamin D deficiency, okay? However, those diseases are correlated with the vitamin D deficiency because the disease caused the vitamin D deficiency. So let me say that again, a little bit more simply. The diseases are not caused by the deficiency. The deficiency is caused by the disease. Kind of an interesting point, right? There was a meta-analysis, which means that they review a whole bunch of different studies, and they studied 3 different types. They studied cohort, randomized, and intervention studies. All of it showed that lower levels of vitamin D are a consequence, not a cause of inflammation and illness. The higher concentrations of vitamin D that's caused by supplementation, right? So when you're supplementing vitamin D, higher concentrations of that were not associated with a reduced risk of disease, with the possible exception of colon cancer. And the only reason I say possible is because the findings were just not consistent between all 3 types of studies. So when you took a look at the cohort and the randomized and the intervention altogether, all of them didn't agree. There was only one demographic, a very specific demographic, that all of them agreed might benefit from some supplementation. And I say some, it was only 1 microgram a day, just 1 microgram a day. And that was elderly women. And of course, these are not the 75 or 80-year-old ladies that are still playing tennis or golf or still golfing or gardening, or they're out walking their dog on a regular basis. These are the 75 and 80-year-old ladies who were sedentary, who were housebound, who were in a nursing home. They already had a whole bunch of illnesses. And honestly, the benefit was very slight for them. So it was a very specific demographic that was at risk, and the benefit was just very slight. So if the best way to get vitamin D is naturally through the sun, I know what some of you are thinking, right? What do you mean sun? There's too much danger in sun. It causes skin cancer, right? And I know that this is a very charged topic because, again, we've heard an awful lot about this fact that sun causes skin cancer and you have to be careful. Everybody should get their annual screenings, right? Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe the sunscreen industry has just done a really good job of convincing us that their products are necessary by using the fear of melanoma cancer being caused by too much sun. Again, I want to point back to the science on this and not just some marketing efforts. There was a study done in England, and it was conducted for several years between 1991 and 2004, and it showed that the reported increase in skin cancer cases was actually caused by an increase in skin cancer screenings, and that the increase was almost completely minimal, stage 1, things that they normally would not treat. So I want you to think back for just a minute what we talked about with vitamin D, right? All of a sudden, 80% more Americans were deficient because they raised the bar, right? They raised the level. I'm kind of thinking the same thing has happened with skin cancer. The number of skin cancer cases are going up because the threshold for diagnosis because of these screenings has changed. So I'm going to quote now directly from this particular study. When I say I'm quoting, I'm paraphrasing what the authors had to say. It was kind of a long summary. The distribution of lesions reported did not correspond to the sites of the lesions that were caused by sun exposure. So these findings should lead to a total reevaluation of recommendations regarding the avoidance of sun exposure and the need for a new direction in the search for the cause of melanoma. That's kind of an interesting concept to get your mind around, isn't it? They're thinking that maybe melanoma is not caused by the skin. Now, all I've heard for the last 40, 50 years has been that sun exposure causes cancer. So it makes you think. You know, I have I have 2 family members who died of melanoma cancer, so this is not something I'm being insensitive about. I totally understand how hard it is to accept the fact that sun may not have been the root cause of their cancers. When I think about it, both of them, and most people who pass away from melanoma cancer, it's metastasized someplace else. For them, one was the lung and one was the colon. But I also know that both of them were smokers. Both of them were redhead, fair-skinned, freckled people who sunburning was quick and fast. They sunburned very quickly. They sunburned a lot during their younger years. I also know that one was a regular consumer of the nightly cocktail. Both of them ate a standard American diet. I mean, come on, I'm from the South, right? So fried foods that are rich in dairy and lots of sugar. I mean, everybody drank sweet tea. So all of those things have been proven at this point to impact the chances of somebody having a cancer diagnosis. I'm wondering if maybe the skin was their weak spot, right? Because of the burns, because they were more apt to sunburn. And those other lifestyle choices increase their cancer risk to begin with, and the weak spot was the skin, so that's where it showed up. But what I do know is that now I have a whole bunch of family members who totally avoid the sun. If they do go out, they're lathering on a whole bunch of high SPF lotion, they're putting clothes on. They're missing out on all the benefits of the sun. They're exposing themselves to chemicals who probably are carcinogens to begin with. So let's go back to what I just said. They're missing out on the benefits from the sun. There are so many benefits. You guys can't avoid sun exposure. You can't continue to just put a whole bunch of sunscreen on all the time. Let's talk about this. It benefits the production of, or stimulates the production of serotonin and endorphins. Kind of like a happy pill, right? It regulates the circadian rhythm of your body. So when the sun comes up in the morning, you get a little bit of sun, goes down at night, that's going to increase your sleep habits. It's going to increase the amount of sleep that you get. It's going to help with cell regeneration. It's also been associated with lower risk of chronic diseases, which is interesting. So heart disease and diabetes, several kinds of cancers. Those things are decreased when you have sun, because sun reduces inflammation. It increases or raises your immune system's ability to fight off this stuff. Interestingly enough, you go to the dermatologist, and if you've got acne or psoriasis, they're probably going to use sunlight as part of the treatment. Sunlight has actually been used for hundreds of years as a health benefit and a treatment for disease. Spanish flu back in 1912. As an experiment, and partially, I think as an experiment, partially just because they had so many patients, they set up outdoor units outside the hospital. And the patients that were regularly exposed to sunlight healed faster and had a higher rate of healing than the people that were inside the hospital. Interestingly, the same thing happened with the nursing staff and the people that were working in those units outside. They didn't catch it nearly as often as the folks that were working inside the hospital. Interesting, that's the only thing that changed. Sunlight has also been used to treat mood disorders, right? You think about seasonal affective disorder, which we hear about a lot during the winter months, or the people who live in the Pacific Northwest where they just don't get enough sun. Sunlights, artificial sunlights, help treat that. People who have mild depression or anxiety, people with higher blood pressure or insomnia, all of those things are actually treated by sunlight. There's one study that was done in 2016 in Sweden, and again, I've got it referenced on the website and the blog, that said that lack of sunlight is more dangerous to your body than smoking. I thought that was kind of interesting. So I want to go back to this. It only takes 10 to 20 minutes of sun exposure a couple times a week for your body to create what it needs for good health. Now, for most Americans, and again I say most because it kind of depends upon where you live, what your personal situation is, but for the vast majority of us, all you need for the benefits is 10 to 20 minutes. Now, if you're going to be out in the sun more than that, so got to take a look at your burn threshold. For me, that's a couple hours. I can be out in the sun for 2.5 hours, almost entirely, and not burn. For other people, it might be 30 minutes. So I want you to take whatever your burn threshold is. And when you've gotten to that point, you want to go ahead and maybe cover up. I would probably cover up in clothes and not necessarily in sunscreen unless you're going to use one that doesn't have the toxins in it. But burning possibly will cause you problems down the road, so you want to avoid that. Other than that, y'all, get out and enjoy the sun. Take your dog for a walk. Get out and walk around the block. One of the best things you could do is get out in the morning right after the sun comes up and expose yourself to the sun. Again, it resets your circadian rhythm, makes you feel good. Good way to start the day off. If you are interested a little bit in, okay, so let's talk more, Kelli, about how this helps me in my disease, my propensity toward disease, or if I've got one of those diseases already, how can I utilize sun? Do a few different things. Get on one of the streaming platforms and take a look at one of 3 different movies that I recommend. One is called What the Health, H-E-L-T-H, What the Health. Another one is Forks Over Knives. And the third one is, especially if you're an athlete, if you like to work out and you're concerned about, getting enough of what you need nutrient-wise for that, you want to watch a movie called Game Changers. All of these are going to talk about things that you can do naturally to help your body heal itself, sun being one of those. And then if you still are kind of curious, then I want you to go back to my website. I do have some resources there for you. I've also got a class that I'm going to be doing monthly called Getting Started. Very inexpensive. It's a low investment for you to be able to kind of find out a little bit more about things like disease and how you can utilize sunlight and maybe some food, some exercise, things like that to make you feel better, live longer, stay healthier, all those fun things. That's what I want for you guys. So in the meantime, be well, get out and get some sun.